Hello and welcome back to the Simplifiers podcast, where we take topics in work and in life and simplify them. And friends, let's talk about that pesky little thing that sits above our shoulders that sometimes, let's just say it. It gets in the way, doesn't it? It's our thinking patterns, the things that keep us stuck sometimes when we know we want to go from point A to point B, but for whatever reason, we don't seem to get there. I want to simplify how to rewire your thinking patterns. And my special guest today, his name is Thomas M. Sterner. He is an author of 2 books, The Practicing Mind, Fully Engaged, and his most recent book, which is the one I want to dive into. It's called It's Just a Thought: Emotional Freedom Through Deliberate Thinking. Now, he's the CEO of the Practicing Mind Institute. Sterner works with high-performance industry groups and individuals, including athletes, to help them operate effectively in high-stress situations and experience new levels of mastery. So, I'd like to welcome to the Simplifiers podcast, Thomas Sterner. Hey, Tom.
Hey, thank you. It's great to be here. Looking forward to it.
Oh, man, Tom, our brains just, they get in the way sometimes, don't they?
They get in the way a lot of the time.
We don't really realize it, do we?
No, I mean, we've made tremendous strides in the last 25 years in understanding how we think, how thoughts are formed, where they come from, and why we think the way we do, even though the things that we're thinking upset us. Mm-hmm. And so from that perspective, I think it's a really wonderful time because we are beginning to have the privilege of choice because we understand the mechanics of how we work.
Mm-hmm. And so in your book, you talk about how humans are sometimes prone to being the victims of automated thinking versus, say, the master creator of our thoughts. What do you mean by that, automated thinking?
Well, if you look at the way that your subconscious works, and our subconscious is basically in control, as neurologists say, 95% of the day. We think we're actually thinking, but we're not. We're just, we're running programs. And those programs have been installed into the subconscious, mostly by us, but sometimes by other people. And the way that the subconscious works is its language is feeling. So it notices and it records 24/7. So you're a part of the system and you're creating the system whether you know it or not. So you're either a victim of the system or you're the master of the system. So what happens is the subconscious watches how situations make you feel, and then it correlates the two. And then it stores that as a reaction. And that's why somebody says something to you that you got a bad hair day or something like that. The reaction that you have to that, the hurt feelings or whatever, is something that is automated. It's fired off because your subconscious thinks that this is how you want to feel when that comment is made. And because you are what I would say being thought, or in your thoughts, you just experience the emotional content of that thought. And once you understand that system, then the next step is really to learn how to get out of it because it's a system that's running all the time. So in order for you to be able to change it, you have to first learn how to get out of the loop so that you can be the observer of what your reactions are. And then you have the privilege of making a choice and saying, this doesn't serve my happiness. I don't like the way this makes me feel, so I'm going to reprogram.
And isn't it true that we've interviewed quite a few people here on the podcast about talking about this topic, and I love diving into it because it truly is fascinating. But isn't it true that your subconscious is trying to keep you safe? Right? It notices, things that are triggering or, scary moments where you're about to leap off a cliff, metaphorically. And it's just trying to keep you safe. And so that's what those automations are, right?
Well, yes and no. The subconscious doesn't think at all. It's not a critical thinker. It doesn't have a sense of humor. When it records something, it doesn't say, I don't think they really want this, so I'll tweak it. It doesn't do that. It's a very accurate recording system, and it assumes that what you are feeling is the truth. It always assumes that it's the truth. It doesn't question it. So that's where and I should say that we need our subconscious. The subconscious is 1,000,000 times faster than the conscious mind. And that's the reason why when you touch a hot stove, you don't have to figure out all the motions involved in pulling your hand off it. The subconscious mind jumps in, takes over, and pulls your hand away in an instant. And also, the subconscious, serves us in many ways. We don't need to learn how to button our shirt every day, and all those things, because once it learns it's a done deal. The problem is when it is in control and we aren't, because we are not our subconscious. We are outside of it. Our consciousness is outside of that. The problem with these words is that they're labels for aspects of our mind, but they're really talking about, we're really talking about ourselves overall. And who we really are is the one outside of the thinking, the one that is observing the thinking, unless we are operating in a mode where we are actually constructing our thoughts. We're deliberately thinking. That's what I mean by deliberately thinking. And they're two different places. And unfortunately, as I said early on, we spend, it's pretty well documented that we spend, 95% of our time not actually deliberately thinking.
Right, because we're on autopilot. Because, I don't have to think about breathing. I don't have to think about walking or driving a car. It's so, automatic, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And that serves us. That's, why we can drive in a car and have a conversation, because that skill is learned, and then it is put on automation. But so is the way we react to stress. So is the way we react to someone that says something to us, or a situation when we feel nervous about a situation. What we have to understand is we are not nervous. We're having a nervous thought, and we are in the emotional content of the emotional thought. But we are outside of that, but we don't experience it that way, because up until recently, we didn't even know that was possible.
So let's go a little bit deeper there, because I think this is really interesting. I talk about it as like zooming out from your situation, because I think when you get zoomed in and you're just all in your feels and it's like, oh, it just feels so intense. Can you kind of tell us more about and how we can understand the language of our subconscious thoughts?
Well, the language, as I said earlier, the language, what the subconscious does is it looks at the feelings. It doesn't really pay much attention to the words. So, and that's why, you can say in a situation, oh, I'm not nervous, but the subconscious isn't paying attention to that. It's looking at how do you feel? Right. And if you feel nervous, that's what it's looking at. And that's the language that it is going to use to formulate the reaction in the future to the situation. So, you can't fake it out. And so that's why I said, you have got to get in a position where you're outside of that. Now, how do you do that? Yeah. The only way you can do that is to have some sort of a very minor, I call it thought awareness training. It's, that's a label, but meditation is another way of looking at it. But you really need to spend about just like 10 minutes a day working on sitting quiet. And I usually have people watch their breath. They close their eyes, and just for 10 minutes, I tell them, I give them a recording of an ocean background waves just to kind of block everything outside. And I just tell them, look, I just want you to sit there and watch your body breathe. Now, the mind doesn't like that because it's really boring. So it only takes it 10 seconds or so before it says, well, you can do this, but I'm going to go think about what we need at the grocery store. And it takes off. And then you go with it because you have always gone with it and you don't even know you've gone with it. And then what will happen is there'll be a magic moment when you wake up and realize that you aren't paying attention to your mind isn't paying attention to your breathing. And that is where people fall down in meditation practices, because they think that when they're waking up a lot, because their mind is always running off, that they're a failure at meditation. But in the context of what we're doing here, that is a magic moment, because when you wake up, that is when you leave the thought and become the observer of the thought. And so now you're anchored in the observer, the noticer of what the mind is doing, which is where you want to live as much of the time as you can. And then when you pull your mind back, you direct it back onto your watching your breath, you're strengthening your will. So there's a cycle there that it goes through. And that impacts your entire life, because when your subconscious fires off a reaction to a situation, you will notice Isn't this interesting? This is what I told my subconscious that I wanted to feel in this situation. I'm not feeling this. My subconscious thinks this is what I want to feel. So it's sending off this information, and now I'm feeling it. Yeah. So I think this is one of those things that I need to reprogram, because this isn't serving my happiness. But you don't get that option. You don't get that opportunity if you are in the thought. And the only way to get out of that is to learn. What I tell people is what we're trying for here is not some sort of even though it's transformational, we're not looking for some sort of a spiritual transformational experience. What we're looking for is an awareness of what our mind is doing without our permission. Yeah. And it does a lot without our permission. And for most people, I had a thing with high school kids one time where I told them we were going to, it was like an auditorium. I said, we're just going to sit and stop thinking for 2 minutes. I want you to just close your mind and stop thinking. And I knew that they couldn't do that, but they didn't know that they couldn't do that. And their minds were hyperactive because of their cell phones and everything else. And at the end of the 2 minutes, it was an epiphany for these young people. It was like they had no idea how much their mind controlled them instead of the other way around. And so I said to them, if you are telling your mind to stop thinking, so you're using your will and you're directing your mind to stop thinking, and your mind is saying, no, I'm going to do it anyway. Who's really in control during the day? Because it's not you. And this, like I said, this was a major moment for these kids. And many of them began to meditate, on a regular basis, which greatly impacted their academics. At least that was what their parents told me. So the thing is that, this is what we're looking for. I tell people, we just want to know what our mind is doing without our permission, so that we can redirect it and we can choose. You are the gatekeeper. You should be the gatekeeper of your thoughts.
Well, it is. It's your body. It's your brain. It's your life experience, right?
So you should decide what thought you're going to allow to go through and what thought you're not. And you don't have that choice if you're just in the thinking.
Mm-hmm. So you said something earlier, and I really want to take a deeper dive into it. Deliberate thinking. What is it, and why do you believe it gives us emotional freedom?
Well, deliberate thinking is, when your thought process is happening outside of your responses. So I tell people, we don't want to react. Most people react to situations. There's a big difference between a response and a reaction. A reaction is just that. It's just what happens, when somebody says something to you. And I've given this example many times. I had a CEO of a corporation who I was working with, and we were having this conversation, and he said, I don't believe this. He said, I think I am a critical thinker, and I am deliberately thinking all the time. And so to make a point, I said to him, did I tell you to talk? I don't think so. You need to sit there and just shut your mouth until I tell you to talk. Well, of course, he reacted defensively and got all upset. And I said, you see, your action was not deliberate. I said, you did not make a choice as to how you were going to handle that. I said, you let me come right in and steal your inner peace. And I said, you had no control, and you weren't even aware that you had no control. And it was he said, oh my gosh, he said, thank you for the awakening. He said, I had no idea. He said, but I understand what you're saying now. I said, so see, we don't want to live there. We want to live in a situation where, when something comes at us, we decide how much power we're going to give them. We are not going to surrender our inner peace. Deliberate thinking in your responses is the difference between thinking and between a reaction and a response. A reaction is just that. You have a reaction to a situation. There is no decision making. There's no critical thinking involved. For me, a response is where there is decision making and there is will. You have thought about the situation and you have decided that this is what I'm going to do when this situation happens. And that's why we call them first responders. We don't call them first reactors. So, so there is, and I've learned so much of this, through being a pilot, because the responses to emergency situations are drilled over and over and over again. And the reason for that is so that you remove the emotional portion of it, and you are able to handle the situation. And this is really important even though the situations that we may want to readjust our reaction and make it a response,
right.
They're not life-threatening. they just make us upset. So they still have validity in terms of how happy we are and whether we feel we're in control of ourselves. So, I think that the first thing we have to do is be able to get out of the thought system, that automatic firing. So what do I teach people is I want you to have a phrase that you're going to say. Like once you start your thought awareness training and you get to the point where you can notice that you're having a reaction to a situation that you don't want to have, then that reaction is habitual behavior, and it has a lot of force because you have reinforced it thousands of times in your life. So it is going to push back. It's not so easy to just overtake it. So in order to give yourself an edge, I like people to have something that they say. I call it a rescue mantra. So when something begins to happen, I want them to say something like, this is when the fun starts. Something like that they say to themselves so that they pull out of the emotional reaction to the situation. And now they basically cut off the flow of that. But then they have to have a target. They got to have something to go to as a procedure. And that is their response. And the response needs to be thought out ahead of time when you're not in the emotion of the situation. So we usually talk about, okay, well, if you could be anyone you wanted to be in this situation and you could actually make the thoughts and the reactions that you feel you would like to make in that situation, what does that look like? What I find is, for the most part, people don't have the faintest idea because they've never even thought of that. They've just been in the reaction.
Yeah.
So,
and I imagine for my own sake, far from having this perfected at all, but I think that I've really started to become more aware of it. And that's step one, right? Awareness of what is happening, what is triggering you, and what causes that automatic response, where I like to call it like turning into a porcupine. Like you get really on the defense when somebody's coming out at you, right? But awareness is first, and then, just taking a step back and going, that's interesting. That's happening. I'm feeling this inside me when that person says that. I really like that idea of a rescue mantra. Is there others that you can give us examples of?
Oh, you mean other rescue mantras?
Yeah.
Well, I usually like them to be, it depends on your personality. If you're like a really competitive person, it would be game on, you're going down, whatever you need, to fire yourself up and saying I tell people, look, you cannot, what we're talking about here is a skill. Yeah. Deliberate thinking is a skill. Everything in life is a skill. You start from zero skill, and then you're on this line of mastery. So you have to accept the fact that when you start out, just like the first day of piano, you don't know anything. And you're at a very rudimentary level, and you progress through mastery, and you accept that where you're at is where you're supposed to be today. And you fall in love with the process of developing the skill. So, as you're doing that, when you can't execute what you're practicing unless you're in the situation you're trying to overcome. So you need to reinterpret when these situations show up. Once you're outside of them, you can interpret them as, this is what I've been waiting for. This is because you can stand in front of a mirror and sing all you want. But that, if you want to be comfortable singing in front of 500 people, sooner or later, you got to walk out on the stage. And when you do that the first time, it's going to be uncomfortable. And you just go, this is normal. I'm uncomfortable. This is normal. So it's not a judgment. It's just part of the process of getting comfortable. So, to me, I think that it's really important to understand that in order to progress in the skill of deliberate thinking, you have to know the mechanics. So you have to know what I like to do when this situation happens. And you can run through that in your head. And the brain, as far as the brain's concerned, it's actually happening. This is, one of the things they've learned is that, you can sit in a chair and close your eyes and envision this person that's a trigger, coming in and saying something to you, and you can see yourself responding in a certain way. And you do that, say, 10 times. As far as the brain, there is a value to that. The brain actually sees it. It will release hormones into your bloodstream and change your chemistry. So there are things that you can do. But to really move forward, you need the person to come into the room, and you need the person to push your buttons. And like I said, one of the things I say is interpretation will create your experience, which will then impact your performance. So if your interpretation when the person comes in is I'm mad because you said this, that's your interpretation, which is going to create your experience. You're going to be mad and your performance is going to plummet. But if your interpretation of I've been waiting for you to do this to me, and you're going down, and so I'm going to win this. And what are you winning? What you're winning is I am not going to surrender my inner peace to you. I'm not going to do that. I'm in control of that. I'm the gatekeeper. I will decide what really upsets me and what doesn't upset me. And so you have that option. And so, really, you should play with it. It should be something that you welcome when it happens instead of interpreting it as, this is the worst thing in the world. And I have found this to be true in virtually everything, because if you ask anybody about any situation, I've been through it all. I've been through divorce. I've lost people through cancer that I was really close to. And if you ask people in any situation, if you could be any person you want in that situation, can you define that? And if you can define it, then you want to be the master of that. And if you are the master of that, that's freedom. That's freedom because you decide what upsets you and what doesn't, instead of you just being basically a puppet to whatever's going on around you.
And may I be so bold to ask, because I feel like humans, we desire some level of control and autonomy in our life. And then when we spin out of control or feel like we're spinning out, is when we feel like we don't have control. And so it seems like, by rewiring your thinking patterns and, creating these rescue mantras and really thinking about what is happening to you and how you interpret what's happening to you is giving back a little bit of that control or sense of control in your life. Is that what we're at?
It gives you a lot of control. The first time that somebody, and I have seen this so many times with clients, the first time a situation, whether it's speaking up in a meeting at work, or being in a couple's counseling situation where one person is very intimidating to the other person, whatever it is, when you realize that you can be who you want to be, when you have that experience, it's very inspiring. And it also is a sense of, I want more of this. Because, I was who I wanted to be in that situation. I was not controlled by the other person.
Yeah. And you stay true to your core values. You stay true to who you really hang your hat on as your identity when you are, authentically yourself, right?
Yes. I mean, doesn't everybody want to be a person who is not controlled by the environment outside of them?
Sure.
Like you're really not a very free person if all somebody has to say is make a comment to you, and all of a sudden your mood plummets. I remember my older daughter one day came home from school. This is when she was in 7th grade, I think, and it was like 4:30 in the afternoon, and when she came in, I could tell she was down, and I said, "What's up?" And she said, "This girl made fun of my hair." And I said, "When was that?" And she said, "Like 8 o'clock this morning." And I said, do you realize I don't think that girl is still thinking about your hair like now? I said, but you've been thinking about it all day. And we know that every time you have a thought, your blood chemistry changes. So from your body's perspective, every time you remember that comment, your body thinks it just happened. Yeah. And, and all the toxicity goes through you. And she's in control of you. Like, she's probably home watching TV and you're still being upset by something that somebody said. That's not freedom.
And how many times does that happen to us, even as adults? I mean, even today or this week, raise your hand if you're listening to us and that's happened, where you're like, man, I got sucked in again. I want to switch gears a little bit because, talking about repetition as mastery and all of that, it makes me think about a portion in your book of talking about perfectionism. And if you don't mind, I'd love to read a little bit from it.
Sure.
So page 58, you said this: "From my perspective, perfection is not a state that we finally reach, at least not in this lifetime. It's not a certain amount of money, a certain number of possessions, or a certain level of skill in an art form. All of these limitations in one form or another. Any place or finite number we try to get to, air quotes, is limited by nature. During my tenure as a concert piano technician, I spent quite a bit of time working with some of the best artists and musicians the world has seen. Besides musicians, I also worked extensively with dance and ballet companies from around the world. And I can tell you that none of them felt that they were as good as they could be. None of them even put effort into thinking about such a thing because they knew their art form was infinite. That was something they cherished. True perfection is the ability to expand infinitely. It must be endless in nature. What do you mean by that?
Well, I think that, there is a feeling most of us, everybody has, that they are aware of more sometimes than others. And it's a feeling of being incomplete. Mm-hmm. It's always this feeling of, if you ask somebody, are you really, really happy? You don't usually get, oh, yeah, I couldn't be happier. People, there always feels like there's something missing. And we need to get there, and of course the media is aware of this, or the marketing media. That's what the engine that drives it. So it's always presenting this concept of you can't be happy with who you are and where you are right now. You have to get to over there. Yeah. When you get over there, then that feeling that you're dealing with is going to go away, but it never does go away. And my take on that is it's not supposed to go away. The reason that we have that feeling is it's really just data. Feeling is data. It's just information. And it's there to tell us that we are infinite beings. And that's the reason why we have Stradivarius violins and the Sistine Chapel and the technology that we have today. It's because we have always wanted to explore more. And perfection, to me, as a musician, when I was very involved in music, I learned that one of the things I observed about myself, and I wrote about this in The Practicing Mind, was one time when I was 19, I felt I was not very good. And now a lot of people thought I was good, but I didn't think I was good. And that was because I was seeing myself from a point of relativity. I wasn't looking at the wake behind the boat. I wasn't paying attention to what did I feel like on my first day of piano lessons? I was way past that. All I was seeing was what I couldn't do. And I was misinterpreting that as a sign that I wasn't very good. So what I did was I wrote down everything I thought I needed to be able to do to feel that I was a good musician. And I wrote it down on a page, and I thought to myself, that should take me about 5 years to get to there. So now I had this inspiring thing that I was going to dive into, and I was going to accomplish this. And when I got to there, this feeling was going to go away. And it was about 1.5 years, 2 years later, I was in college, and I was in the practice room one Saturday night, and I was practicing. And I was trying to, because you're always up against your threshold. That's just the way it works. You're always trying to do what you can't do. You're not doing what you've mastered, and you don't notice what you're good at because you're good at it. So it just kind of flows effortlessly. Yeah. So what I did was I was trying to do something that I couldn't do, and I got frustrated just like I did when I was 19. But I'd forgotten about all that, and I got disgusted, and I said, I'm just quitting for tonight. And as I was putting everything away, that paper, which I totally had forgotten about, fell out of my notebook. And when I read the paper and I looked at everything on there that I thought was going to answer all of my questions, I saw that it didn't take 5 years, that I had been able to do it for some time. And it had only been it was less than 2 years since I had written it. And it was really an epiphany because my initial knee-jerk reaction was, I'm never going to feel like I'm a good musician. That was the first thing I had was this feeling is going to be with me forever. This is awful. But then that flipped very quickly. And I thought, no, this is actually great because I'm never going to get to this place where I feel like I can't get any better. And that's the blessing of perfection. True perfection is being unlimited. You have to be unlimited. Otherwise, you get to this level and then there's nowhere to go. Yeah. You're done. Okay, well, there's no reason to play the piano anymore because I can't get any better. And this is what I saw with all of these really high level artists. They never even broached that. To them, it was no, I don't want to be as good as I can be. I just want to get better. That's all I want to do is explore how good can I be. And when you do do that, it's such a sense of freedom because you stop feeling this resistance to where you are and where you think you need to be. You become moment to moment, you become immersed in the present moment, and you just become content with where you are because you realize I'm an infant being and this is where I am. So there is no place I have to get to because there is no place that I'm going to get to, which is going to make this feeling go away because I'm supposed to have it. Otherwise, I would have gotten to a certain level, the second book of John Schwam, Piano Lessons, and said, well, there's no reason to, I'm done. So to me, I think we really misinterpret that. And that's all it is. We're back to interpretation creates your experience.
1,000%. And ultimately, isn't that what we all want is, like you said at the very beginning, inner peace, deep contentment. Those are things that require us to flip the script a bit and do exactly the work that you're talking about here of rewiring your thinking patterns. You talked about
especially today. I mean, I think we're under so much pressure and we're connected to the media 24/7.
Yes.
So we're constantly being shown why we're not happy. That is if constantly being reinforced. You can't be happy where you are because you don't have this, you don't have that. And if anybody's been to this place for vacation or whatever it is, are you still working? What's wrong with you? All this stuff is constantly going into us from our whole life, and it makes us feel like. It makes us feel like I'm not happy and I must be doing something wrong.
Mm-hmm. I'm not enough. Yeah. And again, I think that the tools you lay out in your book help people say, oh, wait, hang on. I'm not going to jump on that train. I'm going to, with awareness, jump off and think deliberately in a different direction. So the last tool I want to, sprinkle in here just to entice people is something you call heart math in the book. What is it and how can it really help me when I communicate with others?
Heart math is a fascinating science. They're about 3.5 decades into the research. And what they have found is there is the Heart Math Institute, which people can look up. But what I think the major thing that they have found, the neurocardiologist found out, and I'm not sure of the exact date, but I'm guessing it was late 90s, early 2000s, is that our heart has the equivalent of a brain and a nervous system memory. And that if you look at the traffic, the communication traffic, your heart talks about 75 to 80% of the time to the brain, not the other way around. Actually, what the brain's role is fairly limited, like releasing hormones and monitoring blood pressure and things like that. But it depends on the heart to tell it what to do. And I think one of the most fascinating parts of it is that the heart produces enough electricity to run the body, that the body needs. But it's so strong in this electricity that it produces a field outside of us. And that field, I don't know that I think their ability to measure how far it goes is limited by the technology. But the field has information in it. And that information is who we are. It's who we are, how we feel about the person that's in front of us, how we feel about the situation we're in. There's all kinds of data in that field. And because our neurosystem is designed to receive that information, we receive that information from others. And so there can be a real disconnect because, as I said before, you can say whatever you want out of your mouth. It doesn't have to be the truth, but the heart never lies. The data that is embedded and encoded into this field is always the truth. So you can be in a situation where somebody is saying something, but something doesn't feel right. And that's because your heart is talking to their heart and it's receiving this information. And this is hard science. It's not like, hocus pocus stuff. This is just where we're getting to with science of consciousness and all this. And I think this is so amazing because, it shows us that, well, for one, we need to take responsibility for our thinking. Because what we're thinking, this energy it's electromagnetic energy, and the example that they give, it's just like your cell phone. Your cell phone puts out an electromagnetic wave, and in that wave, it's carrying your phone conversation, the texting that you're sending, the pictures that you're sending someone, and that's what our heart energy is doing. It's putting this energy out into the world, and if we're putting out fear and anger and you got 20 million or a billion people putting out fear and anger, that's impacting the consciousness of the whole world and the moods of the whole world. And so this is one of the reasons people ask me, why did I write this book? It's like, it's to understand that you do have control over what you think, and you need to take responsibility for that, because it's much bigger than you. It's where we're heading and what kind of a world we want our kids to have and the next generation, and how much we can control. I mean, they're doing all these experiments with pods around the world where they can actually get all these people to think peace in certain areas, and they can actually impact the consciousness of the people in that area. And this is like, again, it's peer-reviewed hard science. It's not like like something that hippies do in Costa Rica. So it's.
But they may very well be doing this too. So the book is called "It's Just a Thought: Emotional Freedom Through Deliberate Thinking." Thomas, thank you so much for being here and sharing your wisdom. This book is available wherever books are sold, either online or your favorite local bookshop around the corner. So look for that online. And then also anything that we've talked about, any resources, you can find them online on our show notes at thesimplifierspodcast.com. Click there. You'll find all the links to all the good things, including where Thomas is at in social media, his website, and more. So, Tom, as we wrap up, I just got a couple of questions. And again, thank you so much for your time today. My first question for you is this. Is there one book or blog that you're reading these days that's either inspiring you or poking holes and challenging your belief system?
That's a good question. I think probably the book that I is a go-to, which is an old book, but it's my most favorite book is the Richard Bach's Jonathan Livingston Seagull. And the reason, and I have given that to CEOs, and they have said, man, that's a fantastic read. And it really is because it's a story of a seagull that realizes that the reason he has wings is to learn to fly and enjoy flying, not to just go get food. And it's a very profound story. And I remember when I first read it, it was required reading when I was in school. But I remember thinking, and I've read it many, many times, what this guy said in like 102 pages, which was the original one, was just so profound, to me. And so every now and then I pull that book out. I mean, I'm a voracious reader and I've read many, many books. But when you ask me a question like that, I would say like the first book that comes to mind, which is one that probably had more impact on me in terms of getting me on this path, was that book.
Excellent. We'll link that up in the show notes. Again, if you guys are curious about it, find it over at thesimplifierspodcast.com. So tell me, Tom, who's somebody in your network, somebody you know personally that you just feel is up to brilliant things out there in the world? We could shine a little spotlight on them. Who would you recommend?
That's an easy one. Sam Caucci at One Huddle. He's the CEO of One Huddle. It's Caucci is his last name. Sam is an incredible human being, and I work with One Huddle. I work with our whole team, and I work with Sam, but I met him probably about a little over a year ago. But he has created this gaming system for teaching for bringing employees on board. But this man is such he's such a person for the people. I mean, he has helped, he's trying to get a bill through that they wrote. It's all about taking care of your employees, inspiring your employees. And when I worked with him, when I first met him, and he brought me into his company, and he asked me to work with everybody there. And this is so typical of him. I said, what do you want me to accomplish? And he said, make them happy. He said, that's what I want you to do. He said, I don't care if you're talking about work or you're talking about home life. He said, you give me happy employees, they'll perform for me. And this is who this guy is. And everybody that works for him absolutely loves him. This is the future of what we need in the world. Is we need more Sams, and like I said, I just can't say enough about him. The guy's incredible.
Love it. We'll link Sam up in the show notes as well. People are curious about him and the work that they do over at One Huddle. You'll find it in the show notes. I believe gratitude and simplicity go hand in hand. Tell me, what are you grateful for today?
I'm grateful for the awakenings that I have had. Like I am constantly researching, and when I look at what I have learned about my mind, my thoughts, I'm an avid meditator and have been for 4.5 decades. But what I am able to, the way that I experience my life, I mean, I had some guy go, I want to know what it feels like to go through your day like you. And I said, I'll tell you that as soon as you describe the color blue. And, like for me, I really don't experience stress like I used to. I used to be a worrywart, and I used to get very attached to what could go wrong, and I'm so far away from that now. And I'm so grateful for all the people I work with. I work with so many people, and I was thinking about this morning. I get such sincere gratitude from these people on how I've changed their life, and I just don't see how you can beat that. They think I'm helping them, but they give me so much that I really can't describe.
I love that. So, Tom, my final question for you is this. Someone somewhere is listening to you and I right now, and she's feeling a little bit like a porcupine. Somebody did say something that set her way off this morning. Her defense mechanism is kicking into gear. Her blood pressure is rising, and she is feeling stress, anxiety, all of it, and having a hard time letting it go. What's one thing you could whisper into her ear right now just to encourage her?
You are not your thoughts. You have thoughts, some of which you create, but most of which happen to you. And this is happening to you. It isn't who you are.
Tom, thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you.